there is the exercise. Now, the question then is, how, well, firstly, why did they laugh? And I think the reason they laughed is there's a surprising conclusion in this game, is that the more complex things are, okay, the less traditional leadership you need. If we put somebody in charge of that game and they tried to take the normal deterministic approach to leadership, we'd been there forever. So the question then is, well, how on earth did they do that? And essentially, there are 8 principles that need to be in place for complexity to work in an organization. And these are the 8 principles that also allow this game to work as well. So it's like a bit of a fractal, if you like. And these principles are like there's 2 types. There's the very soft stuff, which is the yin type stuff, and then there's the very hard stuff, which is the yang type stuff. You need all of it. And they're also tension pairs. They're kind of like tension off each other. So the first pair, for example, is you have a very sort of soft underlying purpose, which allows people to get on with stuff, against which are some very explicit objectives that individuals have. So you have a sort of underlying group purpose that unites people, but each individual has very explicit objectives. By the way, these objectives need to be shared in terms of how they're set as well, because in the game, for example, they choose their own 2 people. So similar in real life, you don't want to make the objectives so explicit. It has to be explicit for the individual. The second pair is that you have a few simple rules which dictate how things run, but you also rely very heavily on people's skill and will to fulfill what they're trying to achieve. The third pair is that you have a high ambiguity for tolerance, but at the same time you have very, very clear feedback. And the final pair is that people have freedom to act, but within defined boundaries. So these are the 8 principles that you need to have in place. And as you're managing complexity or you're managing in a complex environment, you need to look at all of those 8 and really think, are they in place? And if they are in place, the best thing you can do is let go, which is the hardest thing to do, which we'll come to in a minute. So the story so far, because we're moving along, and I see that nobody has asked me to slow down, so that's great. Firstly, underlying complexity, there are simple rules. So the first thing is, if something is complex, there are simple rules at play. And that's what complexity science shows in all of the different areas of that complexity science covers. Secondly, that people can achieve very complex tasks if those 8 principles are in place. And you don't need a lot of active leadership. You need a lot of leadership perhaps to get those principles in place, but once they're there, leadership doesn't need to be so active. It can be much more a joint thing.